During 1939, as both the musicianship of Shaw's band and his clarinet virtuosity reached new peaks, Shaw began lashing out at his audiences. "Jitterbugs are morons," he famously announced to the New York Post, insulting the flashy athletic dancing popular at swing concerts. Shaw complained about signing autographs and being catnip for all those mobs of overexcited girls. He later said that despite earning $5,000 per week, "I was as utterly miserable as a fellow can possibly be and still stay on this side of suicide." It seemed he never stopped, going sometimes from Melody and Madness, a weekly radio show Artie played on, right into the Victor studio for a 4.5-hour session, ending at 4 in the morning, then getting ready to hit the road for another week. In April of 1939, Artie and his orchestra opened at the Palomar Ballroom in Los Angeles. But on the opening night, Artie fainted on stage in front of a record crowd of over 8,000 people. After waking up in a hospital 5 days later, Shaw found out he was suffering from a high fever, strep throat, and a normally fatal blood disease. Artie took several weeks off from playing and spent much of his time with actress Judy Garland. Impressed by Judy's new house in Beverly Hills, Shaw bought his own house on Summit Ridge Drive. After his near-death experience, Artie wanted to leave the business as soon as he could. He wrote in his autobiography, "I arrived at my decision that enough was enough. As soon as I could finish up certain contractual obligations, I was going to get out of the whole thing. What was the point in going on making myself miserable in a kind of life I hated?" During one show in New York City, a heckler in the audience made Shaw angry, although it would not have taken much given Artie's state of mind. He walked off the stage in the middle of the show, called his lawyer, and said he was leaving. After a long night of pleas and threats of legal action against him, Shaw abruptly quit in November 1939. He moved to the still relatively undeveloped seaside Mexican village of Acapulco. Several quiet months went by in Acapulco. Artie spent most of his time at a local restaurant or on the beach, but his time in Mexico ended after he broke his knee while saving a drowning girl from the strong tides. Shaw told a friend that while he was recovering, he got depressed and decided to return to his home in Beverly Hills. The last thing he wanted to do was return to the music business, but Artie still owed RCA more records, and he needed to make money. He put together a rather large swing orchestra consisting of 32 members. He hired composer William Grant as an arranger, and the first piece recorded was another super hit. Frenesy was a tune Shaw heard played so often by an Acapulco restaurant band that he had memorized it. His career was again back on track and in high gear. In February of 1940, Shaw went on a date with actress Lana Turner in Hollywood that turned into an impromptu trip to Las Vegas where the two eloped. Almost as soon as they returned to Los Angeles, they could tell their marriage would not last. Artie saw Lana as a typical Hollywood actress, and she claimed he was emotionally abusive. His controlling nature and incessant verbal abuse drove Turner to have a nervous breakdown, soon after which she divorced him. Lana left Artie near the end of June, 4 months after they married, but she did so quietly to avoid the press. Shaw said, "I saw marriage as a long catfight because that's how I grew up." After calling the Jitterbugs morons and his abrupt departure from the music business months prior, Artie's publicist begged him to avoid another controversy. The following autumn, production began on the film's second chorus starring Fred Astaire. The most enduring Shaw composition today came from his association with the movie. His Concerto for Clarinet, which he composed for the film, lasts just over 9 minutes, although only about 3.5 minutes are heard in the film, upsetting Shaw. He later recorded the whole work for RCA Victor. Shaw faced a number of hardships from 1941–1953. He disbanded his orchestra when the United States entered World War II and joined the Navy. Artie was placed in charge of a service band called the Rangers that performed for the armed forces throughout the Pacific. Seeing the effects of war close up, Artie suffered psychologically and was medically discharged in late 1943. After being released, he fell into a deep depression and required over a year of psychoanalysis to recover. Shaw eventually formed a new orchestra and continued to record and perform until he retired in 1947. During this 12-year period, Shaw went through 6 marriages and was with his 7th wife by 1953. Shaw's retirement in 1947 only lasted for about a year, and in 1949 he began touring as a classical soloist, playing with various orchestras in the United States. Following this tour, he again formed another orchestra, with which he toured and recorded until 1953. In the same year, Shaw was called to testify before the House on Un-American Activities Committee for his alleged communist activities. Officially, he was cleared by the committee, but Artie soon faced an IRS bill of $82,000 in back taxes. In September of 1953, Artie revived his Gramercy Five, which was a small ensemble of musicians he originally formed out of his 1940 orchestra. The combo played in the cool jazz style and performed in jazz clubs across the country. It seemed he was finally ready to give up on success and settle for being the uniquely individual jazz soloist he was. Instead, he stopped playing music, having apparently come to the conclusion that since he was incapable of balancing his need for serious self-expression with his perverse longing for celebrity, his only hope of sanity was to get out of the business altogether. He must also have known that his brand of jazz no longer appealed to the general public. Shaw disbanded the group in July of 1954 and, aside from a brief tour in Australia, never performed again. He was 44. While he occasionally led a big band in his old age, he never played again, despite the fact that he was at the peak of his powers when he chose to withdraw from public life. Many of his contemporaries, by contrast, Goodman, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, remained in the public eye until their deaths, profiting from the renewed attention paid to big bands by the media from the 1970s onward. Because Shaw did not, he ceased in large part to be remembered. Instead of playing, Shaw began to write. In addition to a full-length memoir, The Trouble with Cinderella, An Outline of Identity, he also wrote 2 collections of short stories, neither of which met with any great enthusiasm. Most of his latter-day energies went into a monstrously long, still unpublished autobiographical novel called The Education of Albie Snow. It may well be that this book, should it ever become available, will shed light on the peculiarities that led him to put down his horn. Many today only remember Artie Shaw as a star clarinetist and bandleader from the swing era, but this is a rather ambiguous description of his complex life. The traumas he faced as a child, an abusive father, sickness, poverty, discrimination, followed him throughout his life and affected how he viewed the world. Literary-minded, Shaw struggled with his lifelong goal of becoming an author because of financial difficulties and the pressures he faced as a star musician, pressures that nearly cost him his life. Artie Shaw died December 30th, 2004. Yet his passing, though marked by lengthy obituaries in newspapers across America, surely came as a surprise to many readers who recalled his music with fondness, but assumed that the man who made it had died long ago. This is James from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.